Are you ready to discover who you are? Are you ready to have that guidance based on the understanding of your true self? Are you ready to begin to affect people in an authentic way? Then this show is going to be a special show for you. Welcome to Mystical Journeys with Jase. One of the most important things you can do is to learn who you are. When you're focusing on who you are and you learn who that person actually is, you're going to have yourself a power that's going to be very special. And you're going to become self aware in ways you never thought were possible. Focusing on finding your true self is probably one of the best things you can ever do for your own growth. Because when you start to find your true self and you get an understanding of that true self, it's going to help you understand the growth that you've already had, the growth that's on its way to you in the future, and the growth that's occurring right now. Let me explain. One of the most powerful things that happened to me when I was finally understood who I am, kind of like being in a boat. You've been paddling along in life. You've been paddling along basically against the current of life. You generally do what everybody wanted you to do and taking opportunities that everybody tells you are good opportunities. It's easy to say that the kinds of relationships that you get into, well, I guess it was the right thing to do at the time. What is happening is when you have your true self discovery, you all of a sudden start to see things in a different way because there's that part of you that you're playing on this planet at the time. And the person you came to be here, and that part has always been sitting in the background, and you can recognize it. It might even have a glimpse or two that come through your life. Like you start one way in life and you want to do certain things, but then everybody says, well, you're not going to make money unless you do this. And then the very thing that you really enjoy doing is the very thing you have suppressed in your life. So, what I'm asking you to do is realize that when you finally make that course correction, all of a sudden, life starts to look very different. What ends up happening with that very different look is you will notice what you think about. You're going to start to notice that it aligns with how you feel on the inside. It aligns with what you really want to do. And you're going to feel it with this very loving soul that you have. And you're going to start to realize, wow, this is more of who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm going to be giving you a technique. As I walk through the techniques that I used, you're going to probably hear a lot of decisions I made over my life about who I wasn't. And those decisions that I made, they took me certain directions and things like that. Now, don't get me wrong. Those directions did provide a lot of growth, but they also provided a lot of distraction. And so instead of me being fully on my path for where my soul wanted me to go, I ended up fulfilling certain roles. Now, what I can also say is when you come upon your self statement, and this is going to be about a paragraph long, and you get that first understanding of yourself, that's where the major change is going to start to happen in your life. You're going to really start to look at everything very differently. All right. And what I'm also going to say is there's going to be a second half to that self statement. There's going to be a self statement with who you are. And that's going to be very current to what you've learned about yourself so that you can start fulfilling that true life purpose. And then the second half of the statement is going to be your challenge side. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that into a separate part because the challenge side can be pretty difficult when you're actually looking at your choices, especially when you're trying to come up with invitations that were occurring in your life that pulled you off center. And a lot of times, these same invitations are still pulling you off center. So, in the second part, when you're working on your challenge self, we're going to start learning to take real time accountability on those choices that we have made. This way, it builds our awareness. And by building our awareness, when we get an invitation to do something that's part of that challenge side, that is something that maybe we really shouldn't do, or maybe it's a pattern of things we've pulled off, before that didn't quite work out. We're going to learn how to deny those invitations, or at least limit them for the most part. But like I said, we're going to put that into the second part. Part one, who you're not. A lot of people, when being told they want to get a definition of themselves, they say, yes, I'm a banker, or I'm a mother, or I'm a father, or I'm these different things. Okay. Well, let me just say this. Those are your roles. And those roles, yes, they're part of life. They can be a part of who you are and who you've had to struggle with. And I'm not going to discount those roles. But what I am saying is that's not quite the true definition of yourself. All right, another one. And I hear this from some people. You know, they're very flighty new age people. And they will say, I am the light, I am this, I am God, and all these different things. When I hear those in a more lofty sense, I mean, that may be true because, yes, we are part of the same unity. We're all part of the greater consciousness. We are part of all those things, okay? That's great. But the thing is, I'm still fulfilling what my purpose is while I'm here in this body. So if you get yourself to the point where you're maybe a little too positive, then what's happening to you right now is completely away from knowing who you actually are. Now, I want you just to keep an open mind. And no matter where we go in this part of the journey, this might take you 6 months to get the first half of this discovery. And I can tell you right now, it is worth it. So, what I'm going to say is we're going to start focusing on discovering yourself. So, let's get started on that part. Self discovery. One of the easiest things to do is just know that you've already lived your life so far. You have followed certain pathways to get where you are. Now, those pathways, they may have been exactly what you're supposed to do with your life. And that's still a great thing. Yes, being a mother, being a father, being a banker, or a teacher, or something like that. Those may be your pathways. And I'm not going to say that those things aren't great things to do. But what we're going to do is we're going to go a lot further and we're going to dig into those pathways. So let's go ahead and start with the beginning. Here's the first thing I want you to try to do. I want you to try to remember when you were at your youngest age. Now, for some people, that can be pretty challenging, especially if you've had a lot of trauma and you've pulled away from yourself. And we can get into soul loss in some other episodes, but we'll discuss that another time. Try to remember when you were little. Try to remember what kind of child you were. If you have a family member or a friend or somebody who knew you back then, they can actually answer a couple of questions for you. So, what you want to do is try to find 4 or 5 things about yourself when you were little. Let's start with that. I'll give myself as an example first. This way, you have something to work off of. My examples, following the threads. Thread number one. One of my first memories when I was younger was a pretty tough one. I remember that I was a pretty playful little kid and my family really didn't have all that much. And I was playing with one of my toys. Now, this is definitely something before 5. And so I heard the fire trucks next door and I remember asking my mom, what was that? And she said, oh, That's the fire trucks. They're right next door. They're putting out a fire. Okay. So right then and there, I remember thinking, wow, all the fire trucks, they need water. So I ran over to the sink and I filled the basin with water. When that happened, I thought it was a pretty good idea for a little kid. I mean, any little kid, when you're looking at little kid logic, there's some reason for it. There's something to it. So I think that the water may have been just filled up too much or maybe got on the floor or something like that. And I remember my father looking at that water and being incredibly angry with me and also very abusive in this moment. I don't want to get into any specifics about that, but what happened next was that the moment I was trying to be helpful, my reward for being helpful was punishment. So at the beginning, one of my earliest lessons was that I like to be helpful. And in that lesson, I suddenly got punished for it. Now, in my life, I've had several times when I've been trying to be helpful with other people and they end up not wanting it, or they end up not appreciating it. People get jealous when I'm trying to help other people, things like that. So I've had a lot of times where there's been a punishment for being helpful. But let's keep going so that you can understand how we're going to discover some of this essence. All right, thread two. When I was in first grade, and there were a few people that I still have as friends from the first grade, one of my early memories that I also remember is I had this remote control airplane, and it was just on a wire, and if you pushed a button, it drove around and things like that. And so here I go. I'm driving this around and showing people, and I'm really excited about this toy that I had. And as I'm showing people, some people would kind of play with it a little bit, but they didn't understand it. And then I said, oh, no, no, here's what you need to do. If you push this button like this, it's going to make this go this way. If you push this button like that, it'll go the other direction. And I did this in kindergarten because I remember that this was first show and tell. And so after doing that show and tell, friends really enjoyed it. The classmates smiled and things like that. When I was in first grade, I noticed that I loved to share things with people. I loved to share whatever toy that I received for Christmas. I'd share whatever book that I was looking at, things like that. That's one of my early threads. As I got further and further into my life, I noticed that one of the things that my father did that was probably one of the best things he actually did was that I remember being at about maybe 10 years old. I had just joined the swim team and I was trying to learn how to swim just one length of the pool so that I could qualify to be able to be in the competition. And there's a certain time that you're trying to do well. And what ended up happening was my father realized that I'm trying to learn something, and he ended up buying me a book. It's definitely an older book. This particular book was written by a woman who is an Olympic swimmer. And when he gave me this book, that was the first time that I realized, wow, there's a lot to read here. And once I started reading that book and I started putting those techniques to play, my times ended up going down. Weaving the threads together. So let's just use those three for the beginning here. One of the things that's important, each one of those situations is a thread, and we want to follow those threads along, and we're going to learn how those threads of your life and your journey are woven together. And this is going to be one of the most wonderful works that you can do because what's going to happen is you're starting to see your essence in doing this. And I'm not going to say identity, I'm going to say your essence. This is going to be the beginning of the core of who you really are. All right, so let's take a look at my story. At the beginning, when something happens, it's like, I would like to be helpful. And my entire life, I've been in a helpful type profession. I've done lots of troubleshooting. I think pretty fast on my feet. I tend to try to do my best with being helpful to people, no matter what I end up doing, whether it's speaking on a podcast, teaching classes, helping people to become more empowered. There's that essence of being helpful. Okay. So, all right. So now we can write a first statement. One part of my essence is being helpful. Okay. Let's move on to the next part of my essence. If I go a little further, when I get something, I take my time to learn it. I start to make sense out of it. And then my being helpful comes out. And I realize that not only do I like to learn about some things, I love to share them as well. And I can give you two examples of that. Remember when I was talking about my little toy airplane from kindergarten? And I can also talk about after that, I learned some of the swimming. I started talking to my friends about it and how I started explaining to them, hey, by the way, I read this book and I'd love to show people what I learned that could help them in the end. So here's the second essence that I found. I like to learn and I like to understand, and I especially like to share things that I have learned or understand. Okay, so let's take this a bit further. As I get into my teams, I realize that I like to have conversations with friends. In fact, one of my friends reminded me that I was always a very deep person. And I noticed that in the conversations that I was having with my friends, a lot of the times I didn't really talk about very fluffy subject or anything that was really simple. I like to really hash into it pretty hard. Maybe I'm working on trying to work with the understanding or whatever, but I've noticed in those conversations that would become just somewhat repetitive over the years. I was refining those things that I had learned. After refining those things, I was doing everything I could to help people understand those things. Okay, so let's take a look at that. The third part of my essence. The third part is taking something, some knowledge, some concept, hashing it out with others, hashing it out in my own mind, and trying to make sense out of it. There we go. The third part of my essence is doing my best to hash things out into something that's understandable and comparing it with other people's experiences to see how close it is to being accurate. A note before we go further. Right here, I want to just talk about this first. If you notice in my story that I've given you, I didn't get into being a son. I didn't get into being a teammate. I didn't get into being a teenager or a boyfriend or things like that. I tried to get into what I'm about. And I focused on trying to pull you to start to look at least three different threads of your essence. And these threads, when combined together, are going to start to give you some discovery of who you are. Building your core self statement. Okay, so now I've got these threads of my essence and I've learned about and I realize, let me take a look at them. I'm very helpful. I like to share. I like to make sense out of things. And I like to make sure people understand it. And when I take that and add that to looking at the overall part of it, you start to discover your first statement about yourself. And I'll give you an early one that I added. Are you ready? The person that I am now is a person who likes to be helpful, who likes to share knowledge, and I like to share these new things. Okay, yeah, but that sounds pretty mundane. But let's take that statement a little bit further. Now, this is where the real work is going to come. Try to work on that particular statement and work it into something that's much more real. So, what I want you to do is take time to think about that just as the beginning of a self statement. And let's try to refine that. And so here goes. The person that I am loves to discover new things. The person that I am loves to take all the learning and understanding and work it no matter how long it takes in whatever form I have to do it. I like to work with that knowledge and understanding into an understandable form. And right after that, and once I have it in an understandable form, I love to share it with everybody. Now, think about that for a second. How does that fit with my life? I can tell you by the time you come up with your statement, you're probably going to find about 10 or 15 examples of how well that statement starts to fit. Now, I can't stress this enough. When you do your self statement, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some refinement. It took me 6 months of really thinking about, whatever I do. So let me add a little bit more to this. While I was coming up with that self statement, I also discovered that I like to travel a lot and ponder things and ponder universal truths and ponder all kinds of things that I really want to do. So let's add a little bit more to what happened with that self statement with the refinement. I am also willing to do whatever it takes to understand those truths and work them into such an understandable form that I can share them with other people. Now, think about that. So now I've got my self statement. Where I went, I gathered my knowledge, I focused it into an understandable form, and I share it with everybody. And wow, I also included that I was willing to do whatever it takes to be able to get that knowledge. Huh. Now I'm just starting to discover who my core essence is. Think about that for a second. So, if I have an opportunity, which is something that is not exactly I like to do, okay, like here's an opportunity for me to go paint a painting. Okay, that's not necessarily on my path. I might like to paint something, but that's not really something that's really up to the core of my essence. Finding new information, learning about it, understanding it, going to whatever lengths, even if I have to travel, or I've spent tens of thousands of dollars just going to sit with elders to make some understanding of wisdom. So focus on learning and understanding. And that's where I've got my self statement. It's a lot closer to my real self, the way that it actually is. Because your real self contains the authenticity of your essence. Okay, let me repeat that. Your real self contains the authenticity of your essence. Yes, lots of people talk about authenticity. We'll probably get into that one at some point, but the authenticity of your essence is one of the most incredible things that you can do because once you have that essence of who you are, that's the first part where you will take a course correction in your life because you're going to start to become automatically aware that there's going to be things that you're going on and they're going to be laid before you at your feet. And yes, this is more like my core essence. And there's going to be things that are going to be coming towards you that are not part of your core essence. The technique. So let's sum this up. Okay, let's try to sum up part one. I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to write down essence one, then draw a line, and then essence part two, and draw another line, and then essence part three, and draw a third line. This will get you a starting point to discover that core essence. Once you've got that, we can start with the next part, which is the beginning of your core statement. And what I want you to do is write it like that at the beginning of your core statement. Just draw a couple of lines. So once you have that core essences, once they're all complete, Put them down on paper. Maybe type them out so you can change them because they're going to change as you're discovering yourself, and it may take some time. You're going to get three core essences, and there could be dozens of more of your core essences. Don't be limited by the paper. Be unlimited in what you're trying to discover about yourself. Okay, so let's get back to the core statement. Then I want you to formulate a core statement about yourself on the essences you've gathered over a week, a month, however long, because like I said, they're going to change and get refined. And I want you to get that core statement right. You're going to get a discovery with that moment. Once you complete that core statement, you're going to have a discovery about yourself that's going to be amazing. And like I said, maybe the next part is when you have that core statement, ask yourself, what am I aware of now about my life based upon my discovery of my core statement? Okay, so let's write down a couple of things that you're aware of. Okay? Anyway, so we're going to do part two, which is going to be your challenge self. We're going to do that in the next part. That'll be the next week's episode. Closing. I know that today I'm leaving you with a lot to think about. What I'm going to say is this. If you take the challenge of trying to do this, I can promise you, you're going to build some awareness that you have never had before about you and your life, about others, about what your path is. This is going to be the beginning where you start to understand who you are and why you came into this world. Take that challenge and go for it. I have. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm trying to offer these things so that I can help people. Do you think that that was a worthy use of my time? I'd like to think so. And I would like to see that you have the same level of understanding about your life that I have. Because when you shine that life to other people, it's going to help them and affect them in ways they may never have been affected in any other way. All right. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for spending this time. Thank you for attempting this work. If you really got something out of this show, please hit that follow button and subscribe. That way, the episodes that come down, they get downloaded right into your library. And also, if you've enjoyed the moment of the show or that was just something that touched you in a special way that really helps you to figure out some of your life, please, please share it with other people. I'm doing my best to get my information out to people. And if you could share it to others and it can help them in a positive way, then the world is going to become just a little bit better place because of your efforts as well. Anyhow, thank you.